All right. Welcome, everyone. We're super excited to have you all join us for our third Community of Practice webinar, Managing Risk and Resilience. This is recorded, so I've got it started already, so you can watch it afterwards as well. But we do ask that you just keep your microphone on mute as we have the presenters go through, and then we will get to questions throughout if you have them in the chat or at the end as well. So to start, I will pass it on to Christy.
Welcome, everyone. It's nice to see everybody joining. I'll speak a little slower while we get everybody on the call, but I'm very excited to be here today. And as Renata said, this is our third of a series of 3, so you've come just at the right time to the right place. Community of Practice for our Women for Nature mentorship program. We've had a couple of other sessions, and you can review those if you would like on the mentorship platform. So make sure to get on there and take a look at that. I'm Christy Pettit. I'm really excited to be here. I'm part of the mentorship steering committee, and I'm going to moderate today's webinar. I promise you before the end of the webinar, you'll be wishing that we had all afternoon to talk to these fabulous speakers. So I'm going to do my best to sort of steer us through some different questions on our very interesting topic of taking risk and building resilience. Something that we all are, if not overtly thinking about, definitely dialed into. And there's so much great wisdom, as I said, here with our panelists. I'm going to welcome them in just a moment. We have Wanda Brascoupe, Demiesha Dennis, Nora Livingstone, and Tesicca Truong, and we'll hear more about them in just a moment. I'm going to actually pass it over first off to Jody Joy, who's going to give us a welcome from Nature Canada.
Mute. I always have to remember to unmute. Hello and welcome to everyone as we come together for this exciting virtual webinar and the third and final one in this series. And I'd like to start by welcoming everyone and acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. We acknowledge the importance of the lands which we call home and have been traditionally stewarded by our Indigenous partners. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. And please feel free to write in the chat to acknowledge where you're listening from today. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility for reconciliation and our own understanding of Indigenous peoples and their cultures. Today, we're doing something special. We're also going to place a link in the chat, which is a video from our Cree partners in James Bay who share about the impacts of the recent wildfires and speak to being resilient in the face of this adversity. And we want everybody, we encourage you to listen to it after the session, and please share it on your networks as well. So on a final note, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, the Chalkers Foundation, RW & Co., Women for Nature donors, and of course, Pollinate Networks, for allowing us the opportunity to host the webinar today. And a special thanks to the volunteer advisors on our steering committee, Nora Livingstone, Yvonne McKinnon, Gowri Srinivasan, and of course, Angela Seabear, who oversees our mentorships program. And now I'm going to pass it back to Christy to introduce today's panelists.
Thank you, Jody. I'm just shy of getting my chat put in there as to where I'm coming from. So really encourage folks to do that. It's such a wonderful practice to get in the habit of really thinking through where we sit today and where we are. So I would love to start with introducing Wanda Brascoupe. And Wanda is a Bear Clan, Mohawk, Algonquin, and member of the Kitigi-Zibi Anishibeg, and she's a co-founder of the Indigenous Peoples Resilience Fund. Note the resilience theme here. A strategic advisor, connector, and philanthropist who strives to create long-lasting partnerships for Indigenous people as a vital. It is vital for a balanced and just society, and we really welcome you today, Wanda. It's great to have you here for sure, and so looking forward to learning from you. We have Demiesha Dennis, the founder and director of Brown Girl Outdoor World, BGOW, actively working to change President narratives related to change, inclusion, belonging, and safety in outdoor spaces for diverse and historically excluded communities. Such cool work, so important. And with the community behind her working to make tangible changes, she's guiding others into nature and challenging them to change the narrative through adventure. I also found out, as a quick side note, during our little pre-game talk, that she sits on the Fishery Advisory in Algonquin. So thank you for doing that as well, Demiesha. We appreciate your efforts on our behalf there for sure. Nora Livingstone is joining us, and she's the co-founder and CEO of Animal Experience International, an award-winning B Corporation. She has a passion for volunteering, decolonization, and societal advocacy. And instead of just living in a community, she wants to help people be real stakeholders in their communities and in their lives. I love that ethos, Nora. And Nora specializes in volunteer coordination, public engagement, crisis intervention and management, and consent-based tourism. And as Jody said, Nora actually sits on the Women for Nature Advisory Committee for mentoring as well. Thank you, Nora, for all of your efforts there. And finally, we have Tesicca Truong, an award-winning community and climate change policy strategist and advocate. And she co-founded City Hive, which sounds fascinating, a non-profit that's transforming the way that young people are involved in decision-making in their cities, and co-chaired the inaugural Vancouver School Board Sustainability Conference. She also served on committees like the Vancouver Mayor's Engaged City Task Force, Simon Fraser University Senate, BC's Minister of Environment and Climate Change Advisory Council. Tesicca has been awarded Vancouver's Greenest City Leadership Award. So hurrah, it's great to have you along as well, Tesicca. It's going to be amazing, as I said, hearing from all of these great folks. So I'm going to jump right in and get to the questions. We have a number of questions that we've preset for this conversation and shared with our speakers in advance, so they have a chance to think through different scenarios in their own lives that they can share with us, or different lessons that they've learned. If you do have additional questions, you can put them in the chat and we will revisit those as we get toward the end of the hour together. So let's get started. Let's jump in with this first question. What have you learned about risk and resilience as an entrepreneur, consultant, a candidate, or acting on an intergenerational board? So we all have lots of different experiences here. I'm going to ask you to start, Tesicca. Could you let us know what some general learnings that you've had in different roles that you've played along the way?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. I think one of the big, and this is a well-known saying, but like the bigger the risk, the bigger the reward. And it takes a lot of courage and a lot of bravery sometimes to step out of your comfort zone, to really push and to try something new. But I think some of the moments where I've felt the most rewarded is when I took a big leap of faith and took a risk. I think the other thing, and this has been well researched now, is that one of the biggest predictors of success is actually grit. And when I think of grit, I think of resilience, that ability to push through when things are difficult, when things are hard, to be able to really continue day in and day out. And especially as someone who has started a nonprofit organization, who's worked as a consultant, it's something that, you never know necessarily what's going to come your way. But to be resilient is really to be adaptive and responsive to what might be coming, and to anticipate some of those things as well.
Wonderful. I like how you said, Tesicca, good things come from risk taking. It can be difficult and challenging, but I love how you said, many of the good things that have come your way have come from that. Could I ask Wanda, can you also weigh in on, some of the things that you've learned about risk and resilience in the various roles that you've played along the way?
Sure. Thank you, Nyawako, for having me. My name is Wanda Brascoupe. I have to do this. I am Mohawk Bear Clan, Algonquin, and from the Nikitikun Anishinaabe, and also a citizen of the Tuscarora Nation. I have been, that you're looking at the screen, it says entrepreneur, consultant, a candidate, or acting on an intergenerational board. I've done all four. I really appreciate, Tesicca, what you just said about, jumping in bigger risk. But what I really learned really in the last 3 years, I have 3 daughters, two of them are entrepreneurs, and one already sold her first company. But what I really realized was we all have the ability to take risks in our lives. We've all practiced that muscle before, all of us. So let's just think about it. We've all been a beginner at something, right? We all wanted to go down the slide. We all wanted to ride a bike, or we all wanted to learn how to swim. I'm not a good swimmer, don't like water. But we've begun practicing that muscle, and we don't often think about it when you're in the quote unquote professional world. For some reason, there's this juxtaposition of I haven't done that before, so I therefore am not going to be able to do it. I've not done it before. I need to, when we talk about resilience and and I appreciate the word grit and resilience. The reality is that sometimes when we get our minds wrapped around that, we tighten our own body up. And in that tightening, the word resilience it's perfect and it's needed and necessary, but who wants to be resilient every day? So just understanding that taking risk it's like a flow, right? Just like going up the slide and going down the slide. I never clapped for my kids when I went down the slide because that was gravity. I clapped that they went up the slide. So those are just a couple of things that I want you to take away from this, that you actually do have it in you. You practiced that muscle before. It's just applying it in a different space.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Wanda. That's really helpful. And thank you for stating out your credentials and where you come from. You did a much better job than I did. I always stumble over that, even though I've heard it many times. It's kind of a thing I need to work on for sure. Okay. Nora, I want to ask you the same. So far, I love what we've heard. There's the whole good things come from risk, and we need to have some grit. I love how you said, Wanda, a lot of the barriers that we have are in our minds sometimes, and that can translate into tension in the bodies, but we have all done it before. So how do we keep tapping into that? It's an interesting question. And Nora, I know you to be an amazing risk taker and resilient person as well. So would you mind just saying a little bit about your journey through some of these lessons?
Absolutely. I love talking about myself. So yeah, I'm an entrepreneur. And when my business partner asked if we should start a company, I famously, because I say it all the time, said, how hard can it be? The answer is very hard. But at the time, I didn't know all the things that would go right and all the things that would go wrong. And so what I've really learned is to not be attached to outcomes. Because when we started the company in 2011, the internet did not look like this, and the world did not look like this, in good and bad ways. Like, we started and there wasn't really conversation in the tourism space about decolonizing tourism, so-called Canada, Turtle Island, things like that. And so being able to be resilient means knowing outcomes are going to change for better, and then for worse sometimes, and then we'll get better. Having a travel company in a pandemic meant, again, we couldn't really be attached to the outcomes, and there wasn't this is what success looks like. It was really thinking about every day is going to look different, and success every day will look different. Sometimes being resilient is, like Wanda said, climbing up the slide, and sometimes it's like not climbing up the slide and saying, I want to be resilient tomorrow, so today I'm going to be soft. And today I'm going to lick my wounds and have a cup of tea with my aunties and get on it tomorrow. And so leaving room for evolution of your plan of what the world will look like, who you'll meet, is really important, and really honoring who you are that day, because everywhere you go, there you are. But every single day, even in the incremental things that are happening, you are changing, and so is the plan. And so it's never linear, it's always all over the place. And so knowing that when we zoom out, it means it's not, I am a failure today, I need resilience today. It's today I just need to be calm and sleep because tomorrow I'm going to need more energy.
Love it. Love it. Really good points. And this rather colonial idea that we got to push through at all costs all the time is not perhaps true resilience based on what you're saying, Nora. It's more about being agile and tuned into where we're at. I want to ask Demiesha, can you add anything from your perspective on your general learnings about risk and resilience?
Yeah, most definitely. So I approach risk from being calculated, and how within that calculation we're fostering growth, and none of that can be avoided. We talk about how risk takers are often the most successful amongst their peers because they are the people that are willing to step into that. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I also cannot calculate every bit of the outcome, but I'm willing to step into that and to make sure that I've taken a look at what the possible outcomes would be, and I'm okay with those outcomes within taking that risk. Risk, I had a quote here that says, when risks that we've taken don't go our way, for whatever reason, the way we bounce back from that will always take us through growth if we're open to learning. And progress will happen within continuous self-improvement. So that's my angles from looking at it, are if I take this risk, what am I taking away from either the lesson in that space that I've taken to want to grow, and what could the outcome be? Either I've tried and it didn't work, but the beginning part of it is that I've tried, I've learned so much within that process, and I'm willing to walk through that to see what the end result could be.
Growth and trying. Very, very important themes here for sure. Thank you so much, all panelists, for that. I'm going to move on to the next question. I think we got some really good beginning thoughts here around the different ways that risk and resilience sort of play out in our lives. One of the things that is inherent in this discussion is, how do we learn to be comfortable outside of our comfort zone, or how do we deal with the fact that risk can be really uncomfortable? And just now Demiesha was talking about taking some calculated risks, or approaching a risk with some judgment. But I'm interested, Wanda, if you could reflect on how do you become comfortable outside of your comfort zone, asking for raises or deciding on career changes or stepping out? How do you, what kinds of guidance can you give to us around your approach to this?
Well, this is a great question, and I was thinking about this over my career. Started 2 companies, founded moving from a corporate world into the charitable nonprofit world, and starting the Indigenous Peoples Resilience Fund. I don't think I've ever been asked this question. All that to say is, how have you learned to be comfortable out of your comfort zone? It actually brought me back to, I grew up on a small reservation with my community, with everybody that was like me, obviously not exactly like me, but we understood the landscape. And then from 5th grade into 6th grade, you had to move off and go to the school off the reservation, which just so happened to be actually like right across the street from one of the main roads. And that is where I had to learn to adjust. So I've been flexing this muscle for a long time. Are they going to accept me? So all the things about thinking about me moving to what I call myself a little brown girl, moving into a large, mostly non-Indigenous, how I was able to navigate those preconceived ideas of what I could be running into, and that's your fight or flight, right? You're going to be like, how am I going to do this? I got to prepare myself. So I learned to be comfortable out of my comfort zone from a very early age. Applying that to, I never wanted to work for anyone, so I started my own companies. So I really appreciated this follow-up question when it says, do you have a personal professional story of when you were brave or took a risk? So the learning how to be uncomfortable in a comfort zone, not a problem. But how do I access or I look at risk in my willingness to be uncomfortable? Is it a big R risk? In my mind, is how I do it. Is it a big R risk? It is a small R risk. Small R risk, I can do like the back of my hand and blindfolded. But is it a big R risk, and how does it affect the outcomes we were talking about? How does it affect the outcomes? it really is a little bit like shaking the dice sometimes. In entrepreneurism, there you have a great idea, and how I feel is money follows a great idea. But there's lots of great ideas out there, so there's more to it than that. In this desire to take a larger risk, like we did with the Indigenous Peoples Resilience Fund. So COVID happened. This was the first, we had this moonshot idea, a bunch of Indigenous women, around this concept of an Indigenous-led, all Indigenous-led charity that did quote unquote granting with Indigenous ways of knowing and being on top of the philanthropic model. And I didn't realize until one afternoon that I was being asked to lead this. So my community was asking me to lead this, not anything that I wanted to be a part of it, but I didn't want to lead it. And I became a co-founder. And in that co-founder, there was a moment in time where somebody said to me, if it's not you, then who? Knowing the experience that I had, knowing the knowledge base that I had, knowing all of that I packed up with me, if it's not you, then who? And it was that moment, I knew it was a big I, big R, big I, big I, big R, big I, big S, big K risk. I knew it because it was not only my own personal desire and love, but also my professional, like there's a professional side to who I am. So that was the biggest risk I ever took. I just took the space, that's all I did. And within the first 3 years, we raised 40 million of unencumbered funds that go directly into the hands of the brilliance and the ingenuity that happens in community every day. So had I not taken that risk, had I not just said, all right, I got all of this stuff, if not me, then who, we wouldn't be where we are right now.
Wonderful. What a wonderful story. And you must have had some moments with yourself on taking that on, because yeah, that's a big role with a big impact for sure. What about you, Tesicca? Are there stories that, come from your background that talk about, how you've stepped out of your comfort zone, how you approach taking a risk that you'd be willing to share with us?
Absolutely. I think first off, I just want to second and echo what Wanda said around it being a muscle that you really have to practice. Like there are many things I think that often you'll never like fully feel comfortable with. And yet it's okay to trust your gut and to see, is this a moment where I can continue to push through, or is this a moment where actually this is too far and this is something that I should reevaluate as well. I think in my case, one of the biggest risks that I took was quitting my job, moving across the country and running for office. And it was something that I did at quite a young age. But I knew that I didn't want to wait until like 10 or 20 years, like the climate crisis, reconciliation, the opioid crisis. These were issues that I cared so much about that I felt this moral obligation that despite the risk, it felt like I had an obligation to take this on and a calling in a sense that helped me really not feel the risk, but really move outside of my comfort zone. And I think what you realize is that very quickly there are a lot of experiences, there are a lot of things that are really transferable from past experiences that you had. So even though I had never run for office, I had been an organizer, I had been a campaigner, I had started a nonprofit organization, and so many of those skills and those experiences transferred over. And then the other pieces that I really learned that I really want to share is just to not be afraid to ask for help, especially when you're in a new space and you're outside of your comfort zone. There are so many folks who have done what you are trying to do before, even if it might feel very novel and very challenging to you. And for me, I reached out to lots of folks who had ran, who had been serving, who had been elected in elected office. And it was just so rich and rewarding to hear their experiences and to be motivated by what they had done as well, and to learn from their mistakes. So I think really asking for help is such a key part when you're outside of your comfort zone, when you're feeling the need for support, to not be afraid.
Wonderful. I love how you talked about the calling. It's amazing what can happen when you're listening to your calling, I think, for sure. And focusing on skills you do have or things you have done. It's a really intelligent way to think about how to be a little more comfortable out of your comfort zone, for sure. Demiesha, what about you? Do you have some examples that you could share with us as well of of these situations?
Of course, one of my biggest risks, like Tesicca, is that I quit my job with all the security in the world to focus on something that I had a calling to, something that was a muscle that I've been exercising since I grew up in Jamaica. And my story was my grandma was the person who taught me to exercise this muscle. And I moved into Canada into a different landscape and realized that the training that that muscle got back then is the same training that it's going to continuously use now here in Canada. And just picking up on what Tesicca said as well is that, don't be afraid to ask for help. And that was one of my, again, if we talk about, judging a situation, I think we're always looking at the end result being the success. There's so many lessons, again, within the failure of you just simply trying something and figuring out, like, yeah, it's very uncomfortable, but what is on the other end of that? If we fail, what can happen out of failure? There's this person I've been following online, and they're the CEO of Essence Magazine or Essence Ventures. And within their response to what failure is, they allow themselves 5 failures per day. And those 5 failures are what guides their principles throughout the rest of the day. And it's not until the 6th failure that she says she then ascribes a stressor to it and what could have been, like, how do I approach this? I don't need to worry about that 6 because I've done so many things within that 5 that have given me all the tools that I need to deal with it at that 6th point. And I've been applying that in how, I approach so many things with BGOW, with dealing with community, with dealing with individuals who I've never interacted before, is if I've gone through that 5 process by noon in the day, how much more have I learned and how much more am I capable and able to connect with people now that I don't have those 5 failures sitting in front of me? So I'm big on failing forward and big on making sure that from those failures, I'm pulling lessons while I'm going and taking, looking at it and saying, hey, I'm okay. I failed, but I've not fallen, and I'm not staying fallen. And going back to don't be afraid to asking for help. One of the most powerful tools in the artillery is knowing when to say no as well. I'm very much very, very comfortable with saying no if something doesn't speak to me. I don't need to spend my whole life researching this to be able to provide an answer. A simple no will work a ton of magic. Seeking out guidance and mentorship is one of those big things as well, is that I really I'm not afraid of saying I don't know. And I'm not afraid of saying to someone, hey, you asked me about this, I don't know, but do you have someone who you can connect me to that already knows this information? And I'm, again, being okay with saying no and asking for help are my 2 biggest things. Communicating your needs. I'm big on that. I'm not leaving anything up to assumption with anyone. I'm going to tell you what I know that I need and what's going to work for me in that space. And then we can, those are my things. My biggest risk, again, has been BGOW. My biggest failure has been BGOW, but my biggest success with all of those are the lessons that I've learned from BGOW and how I can implement them to make this organization a better one.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Demiesha. Really interesting takes on things. And I want to ask Nora the same question. So being comfortable out of your comfort zone and how you judge and approach taking a risk.
Well, I just want all the panelists to come to my house every day and just talk to me so I feel better in the mornings. And I love going last because I had like all these things kind of like written down to talk about. And it's like, oh, they've talked. Okay, great. I'm done here. But yeah, I would say to add on to it, what is the actual risk? And oftentimes we catastrophize for all of the reasons because we need to stay safe in our bodies and in our communities. But when you look at a risk, you go, like, truly, what is the worst that can happen? I'm going to start this company and it's going to fail. So will I start another company? Will I get another job? Will I lean on my community? Will I have to change what the company looks like? If I ask for a raise, my boss will say no. Or will they say no and flip the table and throw their coffee at me? Like, that probably won't happen. But if it did, then you'd know you should probably find another job. And that wasn't a failure. That was actually, wow, this is a toxic workplace. That is an unhinged explanation. But I was also thinking everything is transferable. The more we fail, the more we get comfortable with failure, and the more we get like comfortable out of our comfort zone, where we just say, like, this actually doesn't feel risky anymore. I know that giving up this job, leaving this community was really risky. I could come back. I could get another job, and that worked out well. It changed my trajectory. And so the things that I learned won't be taken away from me. Every day that you take a risk is another thing that you learn that people can't take from you. So was it risky? Yes, but it's always you always have that reward at the end, and you always have that community. I think oftentimes resource scarcity, I think, is very much a lie when it comes to community. And I think oftentimes as well, women are told that there's only one seat at the table for a woman. There's only one seat at the table for an Indigenous person, BIPOC person, etc. And what we have to look at when we're taking risks is the whole community oftentimes is behind us. And this is a societal pressure. This isn't a community pressure. So when we're taking these risks, when we're out of the comfort zone, we're not doing it by ourselves. We do have our family, our chosen family, and many people behind us. And freedom isn't a one-way street. When we act free, when we're out of our comfort zone, when we ask questions, when we say, I don't know, but I'll find someone that does, you're allowing other people to do that as well. When you ask for a raise, you're allowing everyone in the workplace to also ask for a raise. You're elevating that community for them and for you. So know that you aren't alone when you're acting out of your comfort zone. You do have a safety net, and you're helping that safety net when you're moving forward.
Cool perspective. I hadn't thought of that way, how you and although Wanda spoke to that a little bit, you step in and it creates the ability for others to step in as well. I'm going to stay with you, Nora, and I'm going to move to the next question. And the topic of failure has already come up. So we've talked a little bit about that, that being a big, exercising the muscle and actually doing the thing, being a big part of the risk and resilience picture. But take a moment, Nora, and brag about one of your biggest failures for us. And if you could reflect on too, how does this fail forward or acceptance of failure really help us encourage a culture of experimentation and trust, as opposed to everybody got to be behaving perfectly all the time? So yeah, tell us more.
How much time do you have? I fail.
I might have to redirect.
So much.
We may have to mute you after a while, but anyway.
Yeah, after a while, just mute me because I'll go on forever. I think that we have more than enough examples of CEOs across Turtle Island failing upwards. So why can't women do it as well? I have so many failures that got me here. And when I first started AEI, I had been fired from 3 dream jobs in 2 years. I kept on getting fired. For so many reasons. As it turns out, I'm not really manageable. Like Wanda, I want to work for myself. But when I think about these failures, every time I got fired, I would lay on my apartment floor and I would cry, and I would call my dad and say, I am not okay, but I will be. It just means that this for some reason isn't going to be for me. And it's teaching me something. I don't know what it is. And sometimes I'm just saying that so my dad doesn't worry. I don't believe that. I don't know where this is going to go. But looking at the catastrophe of it all, there's very few failures that will fail in a catastrophe spiraling way. Very often something bad will happen. You'll change your trajectory. Life is not linear. And so you'll I hate this term, but you'll pivot into something else, and then you'll pivot again, and it will go up and down and everything else. As a very funny, weird example, I use X, Twitter, sometimes for AEI, and I used to use it a lot, and now it is the dumpster fire that it is. But when it was still a different world and we used it, I wrote a tweet that I was talking about bat conservation in Australia and how much we love bat well, I've already done it, how we love that conservation. And I wrote, AEI loves bad conversation. Come travel with us. And then I sent it out. And like, that's a huge failure. My only job for that moment was to like write bat conservation. And no. And does it matter? No. Is it a funny story I think about more than once a week? Yes, because it's the funniest way to fail. But I think that when I think about all these failures and I think about all the silly things that I've done, it just created this person, me, that is better with my failures and is better with other people's failures. When someone tweets for the company now and they make a mistake, I can go, oh yeah, wow, do I ever not care, because it's Twitter and who would? But also, like, I've made those mistakes. It's totally fine. This is just how it works when you're in community. We accept all of these things. If I hadn't been fired from, again, 3 jobs, that each job I was like, oh, this is why I'm here. This is my dream job. I'm going to be amazing at it. And then get out of here, Nora. If I hadn't been fired from each one, I wouldn't be traveling around the world, getting people to volunteer on local animal programs. I wouldn't be going to Australia in a month. My life would be, I'd probably be very happy with it, but I'm now living a dream I didn't realize I would have before. And I'm living it in this authentic way because I have failed. I'm not tricking anyone that, oh, I'm perfect and I got here because I never made a mistake. I got here because I make loads of them and everyone in the company does. And that's fine, because then we've learned. We've fallen down, we got up again and said, well, walking is hard. Let's continue.
Very good. Thank you so much, Nora, and for your openness, and your effervescence tells us that yes, you did indeed survive those things that did not work out. That's refreshing and important for us all to acknowledge. Demiesha, you talked in your last remarks a little bit about failure being a big part about what you're thinking about when you're thinking about your learning and moving ahead. Do you have a specific failure you'd be willing to share, and any thoughts on, you know, how do we build this culture of experimentation that leads to trust and health as opposed to squelching everything down into perfection?
Yeah, I think one of the big things and I go back to, nothing or anyone is perfect. I think about how like we design our own ideas of what failure looks like, but then we allow so many people to influence the outcome of what that failure can look like. And then we reside in what other people think versus residing in the idea that we own our failures, right? We created them. We own the idea of what that can look like in the big picture, and we're the only ones who are going to bounce back from that. Society is not going to bounce back from that failure with us. When I think about, in the context of BGOW, the failure that I own for myself is not knowing how to ask for help in the beginning, and being in the space where I know exactly what I want BGOW to look like. I know exactly who this community is going to serve, and no one can tell me how I should run this thing. And that was the biggest piece of failure for myself. I sat through so many, crying sessions, so many doubting sessions, when I realized that, hey, you're here thinking about what everyone else is thinking, and everyone's looking at it and saying, wow, you've done such a great job, but could do so much better if you just reach out and ask for help. And so that's what I did. That failure that I had ascribed to, BGOW is like, was that really failure? Was that all, within the process of what my growth would look like? And I sat with those conversations for myself for so long. And then the right people started coming into the space. The right people started moving into it. And I put it in the atmosphere that, hey, I really need big help. And I really want to see what that can look like if I trust the outcome. That's when my failures turned into lessons for me and turned into how BGOW could grow. I was listening to Nora and talking about those spelling errors, and I worked as a law clerk for a very long time, and know the absolute, cacophony that can that can happen when we make one spelling failure and we think everyone else is looking at that, and half the time people don't even read. So those simple things that we're considering as failures, it's knowing that your failure is a very personal thing, and that at the end of the day, no one can tell you what that can look like for you. No one's going to be able to tell you what coming back from that will look like. And you're the only one who's able to manage those. And that's how I moved through, again, biggest risk, failures, and the success that came from BGOW is with sitting with that and knowing that I'm the only person who's going to be able to own what failure looks like for me.
Wonderful. So insightful. So insightful. Tesicca, how about you?
Yeah, well, I think for me, running for office for sure and losing and not getting elected was one of the biggest public failures, right? It's some of the things that everyone knows, and is part of your conversation and part of your daily life afterwards. But for me, coming into it, I knew there was a very high likelihood of failure in that sense. I was running in a riding that had never been elected by my party, had been 30 years with another party. And so it was a bit of a David versus Goliath story. I knew that I was the underdog in that case. And so for me, I think really parsing out what's within your control and what's outside of your control is really, really key. And for me, the literature says, as a candidate, you're only responsible for about 3 to maybe 8% of your election's success or failure. And so figuring out, I had to set my own goals for what success or failure would look like in that case, knowing that whether I got elected or not partially was because of my actions, but also partially were due to lots of factors out of my control, right? Like the feelings of the day, what was in the media, what was the leader saying at the time. And so for me, I set my own goals around what do I want to do with this campaign, right? And for me, one of the big goals was to make sure that folks who never otherwise would have the opportunity to work within campaigns, to volunteer, to see the inside, the behind the scenes, would have an opportunity to get engaged in the political process. That was something that was within my control. Another piece was to mentor other folks who wanted to run, so that I knew that I had about half a dozen folks with me who they themselves wanted to run, 2 of which have now run and have now been elected. And so those are their successes to own and to claim. But I think just there's a piece of pride for me to having been part of their story as well, which is so important. But that public failure was something that I had to wrestle with for a long time afterwards, knowing that I was a failed political candidate. But I think really reframing that and not seeing that as failure, but seeing it as, what are the lessons that I can learn from this experience? What are all the richness, the relationships, the new friendships, the learnings that I really got out of that experience, and not just focusing on the outcome itself. I think that attachment to the outcome, especially when it's outside of our control, can be really unhealthy. And so really looking and enjoying the journey, enjoying the process is so key.
Enjoying the process. Yes, not always an easy task, but a very important point for sure. For sure. Wanda, would you weigh in on this question for us?
Yes, I really appreciated all of those 3 because I'm actually going to take some of these tips and think, okay, I'm going to allow myself, particularly the 5 fails a day. I think that one's pretty key because I do like that. Check. So this failure that I want to share, I've had numerous failures in my life, professional, personal, all of those things. But this one really is, it's my own personal failure. So my failure to myself, not my failure outwardly, and it's my biggest failure. And only when I stepped into it and recognized it did things change. And what I mean by that is, as an Indigenous person, you're growing up, generally speaking, you can live in your community, but you also have to live outside of your community. And I think other people can attest, can take some of this and it apply to their own lives. So I started life by knowing I needed to acclimate to the outside world, whatever that is for you. I needed to acclimate. I am who I am. Luckily, was raised in a home that was that understood the brilliance and ingenuity that exists and lives in Indigenous communities coast to coast to coast. But you also have to acclimate when you go outside of that safety net, right? We talked about that safety net. And what I really realized, my biggest failure in life was, who wants to be uncomfortable? So I'm going to acclimate a little bit more than where I know my core is. And I'm going to acclimate a little bit more so I can protect myself. So I don't need, I'm going to go along to get along to a certain extent, but yet at the same time, I'm losing myself. I'm not really honoring my own self-worth. So only when I really looked at it, it was just I heard it somewhere. And I've applied it to my life, and luckily I've applied it to my children's lives. I have 3 daughters. Is that in that acclimation, there is a time where you do need to, there are customs and things like that to go, whether you're doing business in Japan or whether you're doing business in Nairobi or you're doing business in North America. You do need to acclimate, but not to lose yourself in that acclimation. So when I allowed my ego, what I mean by that, I call it the annoying roommate. So I have this daily annoying roommate that says to me, you're this, you're that, whatever. It, and it's on replay wherever it is that you are in your life at that replay. So when I stop my annoying roommate, I'm like, okay, just be quiet because I really want to do this. It feels right. I follow my intuition. I follow my gut. I might make mistakes on it, but I know this is the right path for me. So when you can quiet the annoying roommate, realize that it's there, and quiet the annoying roommate is when you can work. Oh, I actually have a timer on. When you can actually get through it. So basically, all of us have our secret sauce, right? Each one of us have our secret sauce, and when you're really true to your own, I'm going to use a metaphor, when you're really true to your own recipe, because we all have our own recipe. When you're true to your own recipe, that is what the world needs from you. It is it not only needs it, it wants it. And it really, I think that's the path to having a more fulfilling life when we all pass on. What was my life? How did I contribute? And did I contribute my truest self? So only when I didn't acclimate and stood on my truest self was I able to get through my biggest failure, which was my annoying roommate and me listening to the annoying roommate.
I just love that vision of the ego as the annoying roommate, driving us to do all these things that aren't really us. I think that's really, really poignant, Wanda, for sure. Love it. So many of the speakers have already talked about, becoming more resilient. Our last question is about, how do we become more resilient? And what are the things that we need to do? We've already had a lot of wonderful ideas to that, focusing on the muscle and really reframing a failure and asking for help and all of these wonderful things. So let's cap off our discussion with some more strategies for being resilient. And what can we do for each other? Because one of the things that has come up, a few times here is the importance of being able to reach for help. And what can we also do for each other to create resilient spaces that support equity and anti-racism? So resilience for ourselves and resilience for the systems that we hope to continue to build as we move forward. So a big question there, but Demiesha, I'm going to ask you to start with that one, please.
So I had to write out my response to this question because I have a very weird relationship with the word resilience.
Oh, tell us more.
I'm just going to read from a Black woman's perspective on what I feel like this means. The word resilience in its most commonly used sense is ascribed to speaking to folks who exist within the confines of oppressive systems who often have no choice but to show up stronger than, get back to normal at a faster pace than that which would be expected of their white or able-bodied counterparts. Resilience, as it is often used today, falls into the category of false positivity and lends itself to creating a feeling of getting over it. What if instead of preaching resilience, we encourage development of systems that supported individuals in ways that would allow them to see themselves deserving of time, able to practice self-compassion, supported them in seeking professional help, encouraged folks to set realistic, even short-term goals, and gave enough grace and space to acknowledge that they might be in the biggest space for growth and learning in their lives. Though not my favorite word, and if we must contend with its use to describe people who learn to adapt out of necessity, develop problem-solving skills to survive, emotionally regulate to not fit into the angry woman trope, be optimistic in the face of abject adversity, all while gaining enough experience to set themselves apart from their counterparts, resilience born out of well-thought-out failure is not a negative. It can be a springboard into new ventures, ideas, and ways of exploring possibilities our future selves will thank us for. So that is my little take on what resilience looks like for me personally. What can we do to create resilient spaces that support equity and anti-racism? Having open and honest conversations. I think oftentimes we operate out of this false sense of fear that if we say something, if we just speak up about something, it's going to immediately be construed as the wrong thing. You'll never know if it's the wrong thing if you're not saying it and being in a space of being open to being corrected. And we don't know there's no possible way for every one of us to know what everyone else needs, right? You as an individual, we barely know what we need for ourselves, much less to be saying, hey, this person needs that, this person needs that, by just assuming. So being in a space where you're having conversations, opening yourself to having dialogues with people who don't just look like you and people who might have different perspectives in life, and saying, hey, yes, I know your take on resilience is different, or what, the outcomes might look like for you are different, but being in a space where you're open, receptive, and supportive, that's how I think we create support. We can support equity and anti-racism is by being in that space of uncomfortable, stepping outside of that comfort zone where you know that you've operated only within your group for this many years, and you've only sat at a table with other CEOs and other C-suite executives, and you've only heard their stories. What are the stories of your staff below that? What are the stories of the people who are sitting below your staff? How are you relating? How are you communicating? What are the asks of yourself to deliver to them? Those are those are just a little ways of how we're going to support equity and anti-racism, is by being open, is by being willing to learn and having those uncomfortable conversations and sitting in those uncomfortable spaces.
First of all, I feel like I need to almost stew in that, sit and think about what you've just said for a while. I hope you will publish somewhere, Demiesha, that what you wrote out. I think it's incredibly important for everyone to hear and think about. Tesicca, I'm wondering if you could add your thoughts to this question as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, I just want to thank you, Demiesha, for really naming that and voicing that, because I think I also struggled with that, like the onus being so individualized, right? And I think often I've been in spaces where I'm like, this place is not made for me. I know it, and it's wearing me down and it's grinding me down. And I think one of the pieces of advice that helped me the most was saying that it's not that you're not ready for this space, is that this space is not ready for you. And realizing that it's the systems of oppression, that it's not an individualized failure, but that it's actually something systemic and many systems of oppression that are working all at the same time. I've worked in spaces that are so ableist, that are so classist, that are so ageist, that are so, sexist. And it wasn't just one of those things, but it was multiple things intersecting all at once that made it a really hostile place for me to be. And in those spaces, I really loved something you said around being adaptive out of necessity, because I think that's more accurate to than just being resilient. Because I think being resilient feels like there's a choice that's implied, whereas there's actually not a choice in so many cases. This is just the space that we're in currently. And, certainly we can get fired or we can move on to a new role, but that doesn't necessarily mean that environment has changed for other folks that are stepping into the future. And so just being adaptive, I think, is really helpful. But I think also similarly, I have a similar challenge around the idea of like self-care. Like I also feel like it's also about community care, because how can you be well in a space, in a society that isn't well in itself? And so I think it's about taking the space that you need to recharge and to sometimes to step away, to say no. I think saying no and having those healthy boundaries are so important, but also finding and intentionally creating spaces for joy and choosing joy outside of work in life, or bringing that into work as well. For me, I think this is something that I'm sharing, but it's also a practice that I still struggle with, is to create enough time for myself to recharge, to be alone, and especially to think through and to reflect on things that work and things that aren't working as well. And I think just to the second question of what we can do to create spaces, resilient spaces, or maybe less oppressive, anti-oppressive spaces that support equity. I think one, we need to throw out the idea of equality, because equality, one size fit all, does not work. I think that is an outdated and actually harmful concept and construct that has been perpetuated for a long time. And then the second piece is really investing in relationships and not assuming that different, especially marginalized populations, are homogenous. So what one disabled person needs is not necessarily what another disabled person needs. And so while it's helpful to read literature and to skill up and to learn from folks who are authors and experts in this, but I think really building relationships of trust so you can have those difficult conversations is really key.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Nora, do you have a few things to add to this? And then we'll ask Wanda to cap off the question in the webinar for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I'm nodding so much that my head is going to fall off. Just so agree with all of these points that we have to have dignity and we have to really honor everyone's humanity in the systems that don't want us to survive, in white supremacy, in anti-trans rhetoric, in capitalism, in everything that we're in right now. These systems are here to think that our humanity is not the most important thing, and the humanity of the people beside us is not the most important thing. And I talked about resource scarcity earlier, but these systems make us think that there's scarcity everywhere. So we don't want to be vulnerable. We don't want to show up and say, I made a mistake, or I don't know something. If I say I made a mistake, then maybe someone else will come and swoop in and take my job. And I just don't think that is the case. When we are vulnerable, when we are authentic, then other people can be vulnerable and authentic. And when we ask people what they need, looking at like Tesicca talking about the intersections, everyone's intersection with the whole world is completely different. And so how I go through the world, what is accessible for me is very different from everyone on this panel and everyone watching. And so the theory of mind really has to come in saying, well, this was good for me, but the only way that I can make an inclusive workplace for everyone is by asking and really listening and really like understanding the humans that we are interacting with every single day, and really understanding that no one should be put on a pedestal. We shouldn't put someone on a pedestal because they're the only BIPOC person in our workplace. We shouldn't have, well, this is our one woman, she can talk to all people with uteruses, all their ideas and their life experience. But we also shouldn't put ourselves on pedestals, specifically talking to all the people that look like me, all the white people out there. We need to make mistakes, and we need to own those mistakes, because we've been making mistakes our whole lives, and that has been oppressing people our whole lives. So we have to say, I made this mistake. I'm going to see how to rectify it, and how to rectify it is asking someone who I oppressed, reading books, understanding more, doing the work, asking questions, and then also hearing sometimes it's going to be a no. How can I help? And someone's going to say, I don't have time to do your work. I don't have time to tell you everything. You can, Google is free, and there's many different anti-racist, intersectional feminist, anti-white supremacist, etc. books, resources out there. We need to do the work, and we need to say, I made these mistakes. Here's what I'm doing differently. Pretending that we're not going to make a mistake, pretending we're always resilient, and pretending that that oppression doesn't exist and we're all just resilient and doing the best that we can is not true. We screwed up, we'll continue to screw up, and that is going to, and I'm gonna not do a good job with this quote, but Martin Luther King Jr. said the moral arc of the universe is really long, but it does bend towards justice. And so it's not overnight that things are going to change, and it's not overnight that our community will be resilient. It's not overnight that we're going to wake up and say, I'm not tired today. We're going to have bad mental health days. We're going to have bad days that we grieve in community, but we have to look at this moral arc of the universe and of justice and say that we're all in this continuum, and all of the work that we do is creating more resilient people that resilience looks like sometimes hustling, but sometimes grieving and being quiet. And a lot of the time it is quiet.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Nora. That's okay. We are at 2 o'clock, so I'm gonna just ask Wanda, would you mind just giving us a capstone on this? And then
I am going to give you a capstone. Thank you so
Please.
much. All right. So my thing is, who wants to be resilient every day? Really? Are you going to do your best work when you're resilient? So for me, I'm going to go to question number 2 is, what can we do to create? For me, resilient spaces. I really love that. I use that myself. It's resilient spaces to me are with grace. You come in with grace and I don't know everything. That's a resilient space. Simple as that. Giving people grace and I don't know everything. And then the last thing I want to do is, there's this great research, and I take it into the work that I do because I'm still human and I have my own biases. There's this great research that says the human being, every human being looks for the negative first rather than I agree. So I know that I'm a human being and that I look for the negative, and I have to retract that in my thinking and create, if we are going to create resilient spaces, say, what is a resilient space? Just say it is grace, and being able to say, I don't know everything. So now I go forever.
I love it. That is wonderful. And as I said to everybody at the outset, we were going to be wishing we had all afternoon with these fabulous people. We are at the end of our time. Thank you all so very much for your generosity of thought and your brilliance. It really, really was amazing to hear from you. Want to just remind our mentees that the final evaluation is out. Please fill that out. And lucky us, we will have a recording of this session available to us on the mentorship platform very shortly after it comes to us via Zoom. So thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And thanks to our speakers, absolutely, Wanda and Demiesha and Tesicca and Nora. Really, very, very much appreciated.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.